Welcome back to Booked on Rock. This weekend, as you may know, is the debut of the film Springsteen, Deliver Me from Nowhere, starring Jeremy Allen White as Bruce Springsteen. The film is based on a book written by Warren Zanes called Deliver Me from Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, a phenomenal book. Warren was on the podcast back in 2023 when the book came out, so I thought I'd replay the episode for you as you get ready to check out the film this weekend. So here it is. Going back to episode 133 for author Warren Zanes. Warren, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
When did you first hear Nebraska and what was your reaction?
I first heard it when it came out. You know, we were already among the converted. And, you know, that probably, I'm the youngest of three, so there was the trickle down effect from, you know, music that both my brother brought into the house and my mother already had. She had a good record collection that included, you know, everything from Aretha Franklin to Pete Seeger, Josh White, the band, the Stones, Van Morrison. My uncle listened to oldies radio, so we got our Chuck Berry, our Buddy Holly, Little Richard. And so my brother was set up to be able to identify Bruce as something good in the world. And I was the younger brother that it was all filtering down to.
I had the same, with my older brothers.
Yeah, it's when I teach at NYU and with my students, it's either parents or siblings who are the determining factor that give, you know, in my classes, give them a huge advantage if they've kind of gotten that transmission. But Wild the Innocent and the E Street Shuffle, we were on board in a complete way by that time. And then, as I mentioned in the book, when my brother was at Concord High School in New Hampshire, he covered his school books with the Time and Newsweek covers when Bruce was had his big media week as a young man. So by the time Nebraska comes, we're just waiting with open arms.
So not surprised at what you heard then?
I don't really believe anybody who says they weren't surprised. So yes, we were surprised, but we were committed, and I think this describes the majority of, you know, Bruce fans. We were committed enough to this guy to go, we'll follow you. We don't know where you're taking us, but we will follow you.
Bruce told you that without Nebraska, there's no Born in the USA. What did he mean by that?
Well, the two albums come into the world at the same time. And then it's just a matter of kind of differentiating between them. But he had 2/3 of Born in the USA in the can before Nebraska was officially released. So it's not that, you know, when we go into a record store, we see everything kind of sequential terms. You know, there's the fourth record, there's the fifth record, but behind the scenes, it's much sloppier for many artists. But the incredible thing to me is that he had the strength of Born in the USA right there, but he had some personal need to follow Nebraska through, and he did it despite what it would mean for his career trajectory, because he was on this upward movement. And Nebraska, you know, both in terms of the marketplace and just spiritually, it went way downward.
And credit should go to John Landau, Bruce's manager and producer, right? Because he supported Bruce.
I don't know if you know that book, Mansion on the Hill. To me, it's like the worst part of the art commerce dichotomy. You know, the label guys, the managers, they're kind of the bad guys. They're only in it for the money. They're ruining the art. And it's just sometimes that dichotomy holds true, but often it's way too simplistic. And in the case of John Landau, look, he stood by an artist who was making one of the strangest career moves in the history of popular music. You know, we've had muddy, unfinished, very dark records, but not from artists who just had their first #1 album. It's just not what anyone would expect, from the fans to the label to the management. And John Landau was right there supporting his artist.
And when he heard the songs, he was a little concerned for Bruce, right?
Yeah, when he first heard the songs, his response was, what he told me was that he was, quote, concerned on a friendship level. So he was hearing something happening with the songwriter, but he was seeing some kind of trouble with the man. And then after Nebraska was released and Bruce took that trip west that he talks about in his memoir, it was Landau who said, "You need professional help." So he's like, I talk about John Landau's timing in the book. Like, he knew when it was time to be a friend. He knew when it was time to be a manager. And that takes a kind of sophistication that I know I couldn't do it. If I were a manager, being completely honest, I'd say we definitely are not doing Nebraska. It's just, again, it's such a left turn. It can't be overstated. God, the way it worked, and I'll tell you, when I first looked at it, I had a suspicion, and my suspicion was this: it's all strategy. It's all strategy, because Nebraska gets all the critics on board. It's a kind of declaration of this deep authenticity. And then Born in the USA comes, and it's just like, let's go deep into, the world of hits and the commercial bid. And that's not the case. But it worked out so perfectly, it was hard not to project strategy in hindsight. But it wasn't strategy. It was like one man following a kind of deep need. There was someplace he had to go that was more important than career considerations. And in the end, it happened to benefit that career.
There is an absence of melody on Nebraska, which was intentional on Bruce's part. This leads us to a band called Suicide. Who is Suicide, and what influence do they have on this album?
So Suicide, they get a good amount of space in the book because you can't understand Nebraska without them. So Bruce, they're a duo, drum machine, electronic. It was really like the father of electronic music. But for listeners, the song I recommend people go to is Frankie Teardrop, which is a very long song, around 10 minutes. But it involves a guy coming home from a factory job, and at that point, you're close to some things we've seen in Springsteen's world. But then he comes home, murders his wife, murders his child, kills himself. And it's so dark and so not what you expect of popular music. And Alan Vega, who's in Suicide, he's just on a microphone. So he's not playing an instrument, but he does the screams of that moment of infanticide. And it's just, you had to kind of strap your seatbelt on just to listen to this stuff. And Springsteen felt this deep connection with it. And when he described it to me, he said his word was, he heard a kind of unforgivingness in Suicide. And he didn't know that music could go that far out. And so it gave him a kind of license. And on the song State Trooper, you hear Springsteen do these screams that are almost like him signing Alan Vega's name to that song. So their presence is keenly felt, but they were the ones who kind of gave him permission to go that low.
And they didn't have an influence on just that song, right? It's the whole album.
I think, like, musically, you hear it the most in State Trooper, but I think it's spread across Nebraska in the sense of these things can happen in popular music. These things can, in a way that I would translate it to mean the whole of life, its absolute worst, can be there, represented in the stories we tell through song. And, the bulk of what you hear on, think back to 1982. Look at the top 100. You're going to see songs of romance, songs of longing, songs of loss. That's always in American popular music taking up the greatest amount of the kind of geography of it all. But life itself has these tragedies, it has this desperation, and Springsteen, because of suicide, says, I can bring that into the music.
The complex characters too. Like, bad person can do good things. A good person can do bad things. It's not all black and white.
The absence of redemption. There are a lot of people in Springsteen songs prior to Nebraska who are in really hard places, but there's some like sliver of hope. I think, he talks about, he mentioned to me like Stolen Car off the river. That could have been on Nebraska. You can see him like stepping toward these songs that don't resolve with that trace of hope. They go into a hopeless place, which is where we sometimes go in our lives. So why can't the music go with us?
That's what I think connects the fans so much to his music. It just feels like there's a little bit of you in his songs, in the characters that make up his songs. There's just something so deep. What was it that drew you to him when you first heard his music?
It was the full package. I think because, again, talking about my mother's record collection and the things that were coming into the house through my brother, Van Morrison was there, Astral Weeks, Moon Dance, and then we went back to them, and we knew that he'd done Here Comes the Night, Gloria. Like, okay, Van Morrison is a singer-songwriter from rock and roll. And I think if you're listening to that kind of artist at that level, you're ready for Bruce Springsteen. And, we were too young to kind of see Dylan go electric. He was electric by the time we came out of the womb. And so Dylan prepared us for that. But Springsteen felt like somehow he belonged to us and not to our mother or our uncle.
Right. Yes.
And that matters.
Bruce, he gives you a great description of what it was like recording the songs. This is chapter 11. He uses a TEAC 144 4-track recorder. Is that how you, or do you?
That's a TEAC.
It looks kind of like what I'm recording my podcast. I was like a little mini mixer.
I went and bought one on eBay. I found a broken one, and when I do book events, I bring it with me just because it's good to make contact with the material history and to see this thing.
It was ahead of its time at that point, right?
Ahead of its time, and now it looks like just this artifact of deep funkiness, and it's cool for people to see it. When we did the CBS Sunday Morning piece, I brought it out there, and it was beautiful. Bruce kind of put his hands on it, put both his hands, just like feel things, like yeah. But it's recording on a cassette that you could buy. At the time, you could go buy them at CVS, and little kids would use them to tape their voices and play it back. The difference with the TEAC 144 was that it's 4-track recording. And so that was the revolution. It had been there for a couple years, been out on the market for a couple of years. But to put it really simply, it was the first consumer multi-track machine. Now, multi-track recording is a mundane thing. It's on everybody's laptop, if you choose to do it. But then it was like, whoa, multi-track recording. And pretty soon you see that shift where people are starting to take it home. And in that respect, Springsteen's move was very prophetic of what was coming. But he took it home, and it was still cassette recording.
Yeah. Well, also it's where he recorded it too. Where is this house that he records it in? And it's just in the bedroom, right?
Yeah. I'll tell you, if I may be getting ahead of things, but when I finished the book, I sent it to John Landau first, And, John got back, and it was, we had a call that was really rich, deep, memorable for me. And, at the end he said, so, I want to send it on to Bruce, but I'm not going to tell him anything. I'm not going to tell him how I feel. Let's get a cold read off of Bruce. And he sends it. And then a couple of days later, I got an email from Bruce. And, at the end of it, he said, how can I help you? And I wrote back, I can't find this house. I'm not a great, there are Bruce fans who are better at this kind of research than I am, but you can find a lot of Bruce's homes. Couldn't find this one. And a few days later, Bruce, I get an undisclosed number on my phone, and it's Bruce calling from the bedroom where he recorded Nebraska. And, he says, hey, Warren, I'm in the room where 40 years ago I made Nebraska, and I haven't been here since. And the guy who rented it to me still rents it. And he said, I can bring you out. And so Bruce gave me this last stop in my pilgrimage. And I'll tell you, to be working on a book over a period of years and then walk with the artist into the bedroom where the record was made is as, moving an experience as I've had. And I think, just like I said, that TAC 144, I wanted to buy one on eBay just to have the material history in front of me. Bruce did a few things along the way, like bringing me to that room, that really helped me as a writer. Like when you're standing in the room and there's some history breathing in those walls, and it relates to a project you've been working on for a couple of years, it just matters. It does something. And I think he knows that, and so he made as much physical contact possible for me, with the guitar that he used, with the portrait of his aunt who, died when she was 6. Like, he put these things in front of me, and it's hard to say exactly what that means to a writing project, but I know it means something, So when
he knew it too. He knew it too.
Yeah, he's
like
really
being a producer at that point. He's getting the most out of you.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Because then, when we got into the room, there were a few minutes of, like, he probably saw my feet slightly off the ground. And after a few minutes of quiet, he just handed me his cell phone and said, take my picture. And that picture's in the book. And then he just started going, okay, my bed was here. It was turned this way. And then I had a wooden table over there. And then he just created a picture. The room was a lot the same, but he wanted to give me exactly how it was set up. And just like a writer can't ask for more.
The shag rug was still there, wasn't it?
Yeah. I wanted people to turn their backs so I could cut a piece of that orange shag rug.
Yeah.
Give it to my sons.
Yes. Oh, man. Is it a small house?
Well, it's different than it was, because they put a second story addition, and they kind of blew out the kitchen. So the house you see now from the front doesn't look the same, but the room where he made Nebraska, it's not just those orange shag rugs. It's like mostly intact. So it's this corner, as you're looking at the house, it's the rear left corner looking out on the reservoir. And it's like it was.
Wow.
And wild to go in.
It's in
there.
Colts Neck, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did it come about that he chose that house?
It's some of his road crew were living in another place rented by the fellow who owns this. So he's a realtor. He's, a man who wears a few different hats. But this was rented for Bruce when he got kind of not evicted, but I imagine they were selling the house he had been renting. So somebody just got him a place so that he could, in his words, it was an emergency landing
Yeah.
at the end of the river tour.
So Mansion on the Hill, that's the first song that came to Bruce, as far as he recalls. There was a song with that title recorded by Hank Williams from 1948. Fred Rose credited as co-writer. Rose's theme is of a woman leaving the one she truly loves to marry a man with money. Far from Bruce's version. His version is absent of judgment.
Yeah, the Hank Williams version is a little bit like the Eagles' Lion Eyes, same theme. And Bruce's is much more, when he introduced it live, sometimes he'd talk about taking drives with his father around Freehold. And he was like, we were like tourists in our own town, like looking at the big homes, driving by them. He was young enough that it kind of filled him with wonder. It didn't give him a sense of, class difference or anything. It was more how a child would see it. And his Mansion on the Hill really is, it's not about life's better if you have the mansion or better if you don't. As you just said, it suspends judgment, and it's more just about a child's wonder. And that time when you're young enough, and as I say in the book, romance and class haven't yet organized life, and you're kind of open in a particular way. And that point of view in that song brought Bruce to this young age that was the same age he was when he was living with his grandparents, which was, roughly until he was age 6. And, he said in different ways, Nebraska is about that time of his life and that time with his grandparents in that house.
But this is when things go from mystical to dark and troubled, according to Bruce. The next song is the title track. It's based on a true story. Can you talk about the film Badlands from 1973 and the 1958 Starkweather murder spree? Because that has a major influence on Bruce.
It's kind of incredible to me still, so he sees Terrence Malick's Badlands on TV. He's spending quite a lot of time alone. Max Weinberg is quoted in the book as saying, for a while there, we didn't know where he lived. So Bruce is kind of cut off from his band after being, very close on tour for over a year. And he's there watching TV by himself one night, and he sees Terrence Malick's Badlands. And Badlands it's Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek, their first big feature jobs. So there are these actors who are having a moment, and it's Malick's first real. It's a Warner Brothers project, so it's a significant outing. And the subject is these 1958 serial murders associated with Charles Starkweather and his, accomplice, whose role is, depends on your interpretation, but Carol Ann Fugate. And they killed 11 people. And Malick makes this film that kind of drifts between an account of those killings and then there's fantasy in it too. Almost like a Swiss Family Robinson moment where Starkweather and Fugate build this place in the forest, and you're completely untethered from the historical account. But I feel like what you're really seeing is when everyday life just erupts with this pure violence, and a kind of violence that stands beyond reason. You can't explain it. And I think that's something that Springsteen was connecting to it. But he just says he saw this film, and somehow the story of these killings reminded him of his childhood, which is just really on paper, a wild statement. And it's not a one-for-one correspondence. There's something he like saw that connection. But, he helps me, in his interviews, he helped me to make the connections. But the interesting thing that happens is he watches it. He wakes up thinking about it still and goes to the library to look for books on the Starkweather killings. And he finds the book Carol, written by Nanette Beaver and two other authors. And Nanette Beaver was working in the Omaha television and radio station that first reported the serial murders. And he reads this book, and then he calls that Omaha television station, and Nanette Beaver's still working there. So, at that time, it's 1981. It's been since 1958, and she's still there. And he gets her on the phone. And, I said to Springsteen, like, what were you up to? Like, what were you doing? And he said, well, I research my songs in a number of cases. Like that's not that odd for me, but I was onto something else. And I'm not entirely sure what I was doing, but he felt like, he needed to get this right. And when Nebraska came, he saw it as this kind of entry point into the album as a whole. Like Mansion on the Hill could have led to a number of different albums, but Nebraska, that song led to this album.
And that opening line about the girl twirling the baton, that's actually from the movie, right? That's a scene with Sissy Spacek?
That comes from the movie, and it was just by chance that Terrence Malick, I don't know where they were, but there was a baton and she started twirling it, and he didn't know she could twirl a baton, and he just kind of sewed the thing into the narrative through line of the movie. So it has nothing to do with Carol Ann Fugate. It only has to do with Badlands. But, Springsteen migrated it in. And I feel like he exposes his source materials in really interesting ways. That's one of them.
Warren Zanes is here to talk about his brand new book, Deliver Me From Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska, which is out now. One thing I noticed about the book is it's not a track-by-track analysis.
I don't do a kind of song by song. I maybe that's the songwriter part of me that I feel like you got to not go too far into the listener's business. And so I don't do a song by song. So I feel like you can read my book and there's still all the mystery you want left intact with Nebraska. But I think sometimes if his childhood, when he was living in his grandparents' home, was kind of the personal source material that he was drawing on, you can't find easy one-to-one correspondences in the stories. But I feel it's that part of his childhood is the engine that fuels these stories. But the characters in those stories don't derive directly from his childhood. These are stories he's telling. The thing I felt with Nebraska, and I felt this pretty early on when I got it, I picked it up in 82 and I brought it back to boarding school. But he's telling really, really complex stories with a new level of economy. So like Highway Patrolman to me is still a wonder in terms of the sophistication of just the narrative strategies there. Those two brothers, both of them dancing with the same woman. And then the brother who's a policeman letting the other brother go, though as a policeman representing the law, he should be bringing his brother in. But as a brother, he lets him go. That's such a complex move because because he loves that brother, he's letting him go free. At the same time, he's getting his brother out of his life. It's not some neat, story of love between brothers. It's like, you can't be in my life anymore. And I feel like, man, to get all that done in a 3 or whatever minute song is a writer working at the height of his powers.
One track that I always find interesting, lyrically as reason to believe. Is Bruce making a statement, or is he asking, how do you find a reason to believe when all this stuff goes wrong in life? Or is it that he himself is saying, you got to find a reason to believe, like he's encouraging the listener?
I mean, you said to me, I don't see how anybody finds anything hopeful in that song. He said, I guess it's just the density of that title takes people down that road, but I see no reason for it. But he's seen this effect take place in his career at many times where people, they see the title, whether it's, Born in the USA or Hungry Heart, like they see the titles, they feel the song, and they misinterpret it. Look at Hungry Heart. Like Hungry Heart is like a guy's leaving his family forever in the first few lines.
There's a quote in the book I want to ask you about. It's from author D.C. Beard, and you use it to start chapter 8. It's from 1882, and the quote is, "There will frequently occur gaps in the long winter evenings that are hard to fill up satisfactorily, hours when, tired of reading or study, a boy does not know what to do." How did you come up with that quote, and what led you to using it for the book?
That might be my favorite epigraph in the whole book, because that's from the American Boy's Handy book. And Beard played some role in the origin story of the Boy Scouts. But I just one of the musicians I was doing a book event with, I just bought that book for him because he pointed to that same epigraph, and I said, that's from the American Boy's Handy book. And I used to look at that thing when I was growing up. I had my brother's old copy, and I still do. But it was all about different things that you could do, like you could make your own boat, learn how to build a fire without matches, learn how to make a trap for rabbits. It's all this stuff. And I would pore over this book, and I really wanted to build one of these boats. And I'd just go out into our barn, looking for like, can I use this? Can I use this? Like I never got to a boat, but this book just filled my imagination. And that quote, it was personal that I wanted it in there, but it also felt like just an interesting way to describe Bruce Springsteen there in his rental and cold snack, not knowing what to do with this free time. And he goes into Nebraska.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a great quote.
You can still get the American Boy's Handy book. It's just these old, reproductions. Mine was a reproduction, obviously. I'm old, but I'm not over 100.
Yes. Well, this book also answers the question. I always wondered if Bruce wanted to use the original Born in the USA for Nebraska, and he says he did. He wished he decided to. There was also a moment when Bruce considered making it a double album. One side of songs that sounded like what Born in the USA would sound like, and then the other side, tracks that make up Nebraska. How come that didn't happen?
I mean, I speculate, and before this book went to publication, as I said already, Bruce read it, and so he had a chance to say, actually, no, that's not right. But I did my own speculation, and when you've just done a double album, you don't want to do one again. Double albums are often a solution to a problem, not an idea in and of themselves. So, and there's more labor, there's more of a challenge to create cohesion. I think that's why we celebrate double albums like Exile on Main Street, which, man, it really works. But I think it's hard to make it work. Having just done it with The River, that was not what he wanted to go through again.
Another problem Bruce didn't see coming was getting the mixes from the tape onto vinyl.
There were all, once he, they tried to, look, Nebraska is the only official release of Bruce Springsteen's that was recorded without him realizing it was going to be an official release. So what you're hearing is an artist who's thinking they're making demos. So leaving mistakes in and continuing on. not quite comfortable with the lyrics. They get jammed in places, not worrying as much about perfect pitch, tempo.
Little overmodulation at times.
Yeah, it's like it's flawed, beautifully flawed. We need more flaws, if you ask me. And this is a testament to that. But they finally get to this point. They try to re-record it. Bruce solo, Bruce with the band, and he feels it's not working. So that day comes when he makes that decision. Let's put the cassette out. Let's put this, what's on this cassette, let's put this out as the official release. And the thought is, okay, and it's a whole nother set of problems because of tape speeds, because the signal wasn't enough for them to be able to master with. They were getting feedback, distortion in the masters. And it took 4 mastering facilities to finally get something that could become a vinyl record. So it was this odyssey where this music that had become attached to just struggled to find its way into the world.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the show, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock listeners. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many, many more. Go to oldglory.com, make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's show notes, or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. After Nebraska was released, Bruce went on a road trip that he told you was an epiphany of its own, which he never really came back from. What was it about that trip that affected Bruce so much?
This was really the doorway that Bruce inadvertently cut in the wall for me to walk through to write this book, because it's in his memoir. I was reading the memoir, and Nebraska goes by really pretty quickly. And then there's right after, meaning in the memoir, it goes by pretty quickly. And then there's this road trip west, which is like the centerpiece of his memoir. And he talks about having a kind of mental breakdown and needing to get real therapeutic help. And it happens on this trip west after Nebraska. And by the time, he's driving west to go to the first home that he ever purchased for himself. And it's in Los Angeles, overlooking Hollywood. Before he gets there, he has this experience that, he describes beautifully and tragically in his memoir. And I just felt like, wow, I see a connection between what he went into, that moment in his childhood, that time in his childhood that he went into, what it shook up inside of him, and then this breakdown and this gap between Nebraska and Born in the USA, where Bruce is kind of somewhere else. I just felt like something happened that helps us to understand Nebraska. And that was his memoir that gave me license to go deeper. And then the interviews with Bruce were, without them, no book. He's the spine of this book in every way.
He really felt like he was on the outside looking in.
Yeah, he's feeling radical detachment, just radical detachment and disconnection from people who are living these simple lives, raising families, having jobs. And he's recognizing that he can only observe that. I think he says that, I was an observer. And, there's a crisis there. Like, this is a guy who comes from a family and wants to have one. And He's going to have to, it's very hard to, I've never experienced it, but I've been around people who, because of their success as songwriters, recording artists, and performers, their lives have changed dramatically, and often it's from, rock and roll. A lot of people from lower on the class ladder who become famous for their contributions to this story, and their lives start to look nothing like what they come from. And I think that dislocation is really hard to do. I say that as an observer. And I think he was coming up against some of that. And I think he was also coming up against some kind of unprocessed childhood trauma. And it slammed into him. But I feel like making peace with the idea of success comes after Nebraska, after the road trip. And that's where the Elvis section in the book, to me, is really important.
Ronnie Van Zant said it's not me that changed, it's the people around me that changed. They thought I changed. You changed,
Yeah, it becomes very hard to, look, you'll see people. I remember talking to Tom Petty about like a party after a show that the Heartbreakers had, and he felt like the other guys in the band didn't want him to be at this party, and he was talking about how much it hurt. And he's like, if I went to this party that everybody was going to, there would only be one Tom Petty, and they would just be Heartbreakers the second I came into the room. So being Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers kind of put a wedge between this guy and his childhood friends. But it was the only way it was going to go down. So people have lots of experiences like that if they experience that type of success. It's hard to know if what somebody's telling you is how they really feel, or are they telling you because they feel you want to hear that.
Right.
And you got to navigate that stuff constantly. Like Dylan has been a little, you hear it in the song, it's a little more impatient with that. Like, why can't you just be yourself around me? But I like the Ronnie Van Zant quote.
There's an amazing moment in the book when you brought up Homer's Odyssey to Bruce, and this really got his attention.
I love the Odyssey. I think Homer's Odyssey is maybe still the best self-help book available, because Odysseus goes through every kind of trial. And what he's doing, it's the end of the Trojan War, and he's trying to get home. And he goes through various temptations, various like physical challenges, all of the vices, gluttony, all the things that could keep a man from being the man he wants to be. Odysseus faces them all, and it takes him a long time to get back home. Not to belabor this, but the story really starts when Odysseus uses his cunning to get out of the cave of the Cyclops, Polyphemus. And he tells Polyphemus is like keeping him captive with his men in his cave and wants to kill him and eat him. And Odysseus, when Polyphemus asks him who he is, Odysseus says, I am nobody. And then they get the Cyclops drunk and they gouge out his eye and escape. And when the other Cyclops are going, who did this to you? Polyphemus says, nobody did it. Nobody did it. That was Odysseus's cunning. So everybody's like, what the hell is he talking about? Nobody did it. But then Odysseus can't help himself. As he's escaped Polyphemus and he's getting back onto his boats, he declares who did it. He goes, it is I, the great Odysseus. So kind of like ego, hubris, makes him state his place as the hero with that kind of cunning. Now, Polyphemus who he really just fucked up pretty good, is the son of Poseidon. And Poseidon hears Odysseus say this and goes, wow, you just gouged out the eye of my son, and you will pay now. And so it's Poseidon, because of what Odysseus did to his son, who keeps Odysseus from getting home. So when Odysseus goes through all these trials, and when he finally gets home, his home he's been gone so long, there are all these suitors who want to take his home and take his wife, Penelope. And so his son is there, but the house is filled with these suitors. If Odysseus walked in by himself, those guys would just kill Odysseus off. So he decides to come in as a beggar. So he gets another chance to be nobody. He's disguised as a beggar. The suitors they're like throwing scraps to him. And he doesn't let his ego overcome him. He returns to being a hero by being capable of being nobody. And it's as a beggar that he comes back to his family and to his home and kills off these suitors. But had he done the same thing where he says, "It is I, the great Odysseus," he would have been killed. So he's learned the lesson of being anonymous. Now, that story stuck with me. It was in my head. I'm like, Nebraska is Springsteen being anonymous. He's being nobody. And Born in the USA is the return of the hero to his home. But to be that hero on Born in the USA, he had to first be able to be just a beggar. No, you don't see him on the record cover. You don't hear him in perfect fidelity. You don't hear all the trappings of the heroic rock star. I was like, this maps onto Springsteen's story right then. So I knew it was like a bold move. Like when you're doing an interview, you're not supposed to tell stories to the person you're interviewing. But I was so convinced that I had something that was at least worth a thought, that I found the shortest version of it that I could do. Your version was just longer, but I gave it to Springsteen. In that moment, when I'm telling him and I look up and he says, "Go on," he's with me. And, for me, in what I do, it's one of the greatest moments in my career as a writer. When he said to me, "Go on," it was such a validation that this story did map on. And there's something crucial about moments in our lives where we need to be nobody. Like there are times, my biggest regrets in life, like I still am like dealing with some heartache that has been with me for years. And if I could go back in time, it would be to go back to like 6 years ago, to be nobody when I needed to be nobody. And I don't need to give you the details, but I'll just say that's what I needed to do as a man. And I was not the man I wanted to be. My ego intruded. And so I came into the Nebraska project with this personal story underneath it, with a kind of heartbreak. And these long-term projects are funny, like you learn from them. And if you go into them honestly, you can heal a little bit. But I needed to, there's the satisfaction of connecting Homer's Odyssey to this moment in Springsteen's career and a story of kind of humility and anonymity. And then there's another layer beneath it where it's like, I'm learning because I've been learning from Bruce Springsteen since I was a preteen, and I'm learning from him again because he's confirming something that I saw in Homer's Odyssey. Sometimes a man doesn't need to be the big man. Sometimes a man needs to be the quietest person in the room to let other people work their stuff out, And so that if I were to pick my moment where the book is crackling more than any other moment, that's the one for me as a writer. I've been really lucky in my life in getting to work with people who I've learned a tremendous amount from, and that's Tom Petty, that's Jerry Wexler, that's I've been helping Garth Brooks with a series of books. I've learned a ton from him. Bruce, the way he showed up for this project, the level of vulnerability and humility and curiosity and generosity, it's wild, So again, no Bruce, no book.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Deliver Me From Nowhere, the making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. It is out now through Crown Publishing, available wherever books are sold. Where can people find you online, Warren?
I got a website. My older son just redid my website for me. He did it in like a night, and my contact's on there. And I love to hear from people who've read the book. That's one of the treats.
Warren Zanes, this was great.
Thank you so much.
That's it. It's in the books.